We're joined now by CBS News Chief Washington correspondent Major Garrett, who is in Milwaukee this morning, and also here in Washington, CBS News cybersecurity expert Chris Krebs. Good to have you both with us. Major, tell me what you were seeing on the ground in Milwaukee this morning.
So, Margaret, I will say the security perimeter is as originally established. It has not been enlarged, at least not yet. I've been in constant communication with Reince Priebus, who is chair of the host committee here. He expects the Secret Service will reevaluate and quite probably, from his perspective, enlarge the security perimeter. As you know, Margaret, from attending National Party conventions for the last 10 or 12 years for sure, they have essentially been large city areas blocked off, 5, 6, 7 blocks around the main arena. That's true here in Milwaukee. It will be true in Chicago. Whether that perimeter gets enlarged or not, we haven't heard officially. The host committee here expects that will happen. But this morning, things look about as they did last night. Certainly lots of police are visible. The perimeter is being hardened, but nothing else out of the ordinary, at least not yet.
Not yet. Chris, you know, we've talked to you so many times over recent years about the concern of political violence or domestic violent extremism and the forms it could take. It is a cesspool online on social media right now. When we are looking at actors like the man who carried out this attack, this 20-year-old, one of the things that's being looked at is his social media profile and who he may or may not have been in contact with. Can you explain to us what they are looking for there and what you are seeing in terms of the risk of radicalization online?
Right. Well, as of now, we don't know if there's a connection between the shooter, the would-be assassin, and any existing online groups. That's part of what happens in an investigation. And I'm sure over time we will see the results of that investigation. I would note that in the meantime, the gray space, the open space, the narratives have been filled immediately with speculation of who this person may be. In fact, there were false identifications. At the same time, there were trolls that said, hey, this was me. And so it is a very, very vibrant space in the worst possible way. And I think it's incumbent upon everyone, including social media platforms, to act responsibly and step in as appropriate in line with terms of service to ensure that this does not spin further out of control.
Is that what your former colleagues at CISA might be doing this morning?
Well, I think what's happening there is that over the last couple of years, we've seen thousands of threats against election officials specifically, and yet none have really raised the level of a prosecution. So I think what CISA, what election officials, what other national security officials are doing is working to regroup and understand, hey, what is our messaging? How do we prepare for political violence? Do the existing talking points and messaging work, or do we need to update? So I suspect that's what's happening, and we'll see some perhaps updated messaging this week.
We heard earlier this week from the Director of National Intelligence some detailed declassifications of foreign actors who are trying to influence and manipulate our election through misinformation. Do we know at this time the degree to which that is playing into this moment?
It's early to tell. In fact, I had asked one of my teams about this morning, and they said, no, that group doesn't work on Sundays. So it's a little bit early to tell, but we have seen messaging directly out of the Kremlin, for instance, that suggests that this was due to the narrative, the messaging from the campaign, from the president, that they are responsible. Maybe not directly, maybe they did not order it, but it's the messaging. And so that does speak to your prior conversations with the bigger picture of nuance is dead, messaging has to be clear and precise. But in the meantime, we know that our foreign adversaries, Russia, Iran, China, and others, will take advantage of this friction point in America to further drive divides and chaos. And ultimately, in some cases, like we've seen with Iran, drive protests and violence in the real world.
You're talking there about the declassification from the ODNI that Iran, reading it here, seeks to stoke social divisions and undermine confidence in U.S. democratic institutions around the elections, and that they have done so recently, Iranian actors, to exacerbate tensions over the Israel-Gaza conflict.
They went directly into the gig economy to pay people to come out and protest. And there are bigger questions of FARA and whether they're acting on behalf of a foreign power. This is where we, the citizens, people, need to be much more discerning and understand, why are we being driven? Why are we being fed this information? What is the potential outcome? And again, take a beat, take a breath. We've heard this constantly. We need to lower the temperature and think a little bit more about the moment we are in.
The the owner now of X, formerly known as Twitter, was reportedly making donations to the Trump campaign this past week. Do we know anything about intention of the link of a political backing of the owner of one of the prime social media sites where this is being spread?
Well, I'm sure that will be a hot topic of conversation. I think at the same time, we have to look at the role platforms play in promoting information that's misleading, intentionally or unintentionally. Just this past week, the European Union filed allegations against X for violating terms of the Digital Services Act, which is the law of the land in the EU. So we will see more about whether they have been in violation and what that means, what sort of fines that may mean for X. But again, this goes back to that earlier conversation about the role of social media platforms in acting responsible in this incredibly charged environment.
And they have much more stringent regulation in Europe than they do in this country on those points.
Yes, they do, absolutely.
Chris Krebs, thank you, and thanks to Major Garrett.